Shalom and welcome back to another episode of Ezra International's It's All About the Aliyah. We're beginning season 2. And if you remember, in season 1, I kicked off this entire adventure with the Abrahamic covenant. Told you it was eternal and unconditional, and that it created the foundation for everything that we do at Ezra International. And then I went on to say that the prophets validate the work that we do in our generation. And so this season 2 is going to kick off with the prophets. And today I'm going to begin speaking about the prophet Isaiah. You know, what happened with the promise God made to Abraham is he kicked off a chain of unbroken history for 4,000 years. 4,000 years ago, God made this promise, and today we're witnessing the results of this unconditional, eternal promise that God made to the Jewish people, that the land of Israel would be their home forever. So after this commercial break, we're going to get started with Isaiah.
From Siberia to the Amazon, from Budapest to Buenos Aires, Jewish families hear the call to return to their biblical homeland, Israel. Their prophets foretold long ago that the return to Israel in our time would be a miracle. And it is. The prophets also foretold another calling for our time, to the Gentiles. And it is a call that Ezra International responds to each and every day. And you too can answer that call. You can bring Jewish people back to Israel from the four corners of the earth by praying, by learning about Aliyah, and by giving of your finances to help those in need. Join us at EzraInternational.org today as we answer the call together.
Okay, welcome back. As I promised, we're going to talk about Isaiah. And you might notice the pictures on the screen, that wonderful statue of a man beating a sword into a plowshare. Why do I have this up here? Well, Isaiah spoke over 2,700 years ago. He lived in the 8th century BCE, and yet his words influence the world today. This is the United Nations building in Manhattan, New York. And below that statue are the words, these are the words of Isaiah. I'll read them first as they're presented in New York, and then we'll talk about them a little bit further. It says, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." Now, this is a very commendable goal of the United Nations, but honestly, and you know this to be true, the earth, mankind, will never achieve the peace that it's looking for outside the will of God. In fact, as long as they reject the Holy One of Israel, they will never accomplish this goal. And that's exactly what I feel that they are doing. They are rejecting the Holy One of Israel. And why do I say that? Well, let's look at the track record, the history of the United Nations. We'll go short. A recent history, the year 2020. The United Nations condemned Israel 17 times in 2020, and the rest of the world, all the rest of the countries, 6 times. Think about the double standard that exists when you think of human rights violations by many countries around the world. And Israel is a model of caring for its citizens and the Arab citizens. That includes, I should say, the Arab citizens within Israel. Let's look at the context of this passage of Isaiah, and maybe we can better understand where the United Nations should be instead of where they are. Isaiah chapter 2, starting in verse 2, says, "Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall say, Come, let us go up to the house of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law," or the Torah, "and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. And then begins the part, they shall beat their swords into plowshares. That's the context. Let's look at that for a moment. The Lord's house will be established on the mountains. What mountains? The very mountains of Jerusalem. The same Jerusalem that most of the nations of the world reject today or will not accept as the capital of Israel. Okay? And the United Nations doesn't see it that way. And then it says, the God of Jacob will teach us his ways. Well, of course, we know the God of Jacob. Jacob's name became Israel. He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Holy One of Israel, which Isaiah loves to call him. And he is the one that's going to teach us his ways from Jerusalem. I think this would place some importance on that city and on this nation and these people. And it also says, and he, God, the Holy One of Israel, will judge the nations, not the United Nations. So these are important things for, I think, for the world to remember, and I think the United Nations should be rethinking its negative resolutions. In fact, Isaiah, remember, we're concentrating on the words of Isaiah today. Isaiah 60, verse 12, says that the nations that don't serve her, speaking of the nation of Israel, will perish, be utterly ruined. That's a pretty serious warning. In fact, the late, great Derek Prince spoke of this often. He said he would often speak of how the nations would determine their own destiny based on their response to what God was doing in Israel. And Isaiah 25:7 speaks of a veil that is over the nations. I don't see the nations doing a great job of trying to lift that veil off their eyes. It's ironic that the United Nations would be the mechanism or vehicle in which we would see another one of Isaiah's prophecies come to pass. You have the fact that Isaiah says, can a nation be born in a day? Isaiah 66, verse 8. Well, prior to 1945, there was no mechanism put in place for a nation to be recognized or born in a single day. But when the United Nations was formed, you have this organization now that had to be used to recognize another nation. When David Ben-Gurion declared Israel to be a nation on May 14, 1948, and then the United States recognized that fact within minutes after he made that declaration, there you have it, a nation born in a day. So isn't it God's sense of humor that he would use this anti-Israel organization today to be the very mechanism to recognize Israel as a nation in its modern state? Another thing that's very ironic is that if you're standing in the old city of Jerusalem and you look toward the south, along the Kidron Valley and then up the hill, you will see a United Nations complex, a compound of buildings where the United Nations headquarters is in Jerusalem. The reason why it's ironic is because this hill is known in legend as the Hill of Evil Counsel. Isn't that appropriate? It gets its name from the place where it's believed that Caiaphas met with the other priests to plot the arrest of Yeshua, better known to the world as Jesus. So the name of the hill where the United Nations compound in Jerusalem is built upon is called the Hill of Evil Counsel. How appropriate. All right, another segue, I mentioned the Kidron Valley. If you are standing in the old city of Jerusalem, if you look to the east and cross the Kidron Valley, go up to the Mount of Olives, this is the site of something very profound that happened in the book of Acts, the words of the disciples. Remember, Yeshua had died, he was buried and resurrected, and spent 40 days with his disciples. On that last day, on the 40th day, they went to the Mount of Olives and they asked him a very profound question. They said, Lord, are you going to reestablish the kingdom of Israel at this time? Now, what was their frame of reference? They were thinking King David, King Solomon. This is when God, the Holy One of Israel, operated through righteous kings on earth and set up a theocracy. This was their frame of reference for the kingdom of Israel. Now, if that had been a stupid question, Yeshua would have said, no, it's not going to happen that way. But he didn't say that. He simply said it's not for you to know the time or the season. In other words, they were right on the primacy of Israel and the Jewish people and the fact that they would be there to establish God's kingdom on earth. It just wasn't the time. See, that is something that all of us should learn from. That the primacy of Israel and the Jewish people in the plan of world redemption. This is how God set it up. And so their question wasn't stupid at all. In fact, in Luke chapter 21, verse 24, Yeshua said Jerusalem would be trampled down by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And then in Matthew 23, verse 39, he says, you won't see me again, Jerusalem, until I hear Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So we know that they would have to come back. So what's our response from Isaiah? Isaiah chapter 49, verse 22 says, I'll read it in its entirety. It says, behold, I will lift up my hand in an oath to the nations, and I will set up my standard for the peoples. They shall bring your sons in their arms, and your daughters shall be carried on their shoulders. That's the mandate from Isaiah that Ezra International operates under. And I want to share with you this video that shows you some of the work that we do and why we do it.
This is Mariana's story, a story of the Holocaust, of hope and of fierce love. Mariana is an educated Jewish woman who lives in Odessa, Ukraine, who yearns to immigrate to Israel. 7 generations of Mariana's family were born and raised in this historic Black Sea city. But now, conditions are so corrupt that even with her fairly good salary, the unrelenting poverty is all-consuming, while medical care for her family is clearly non-existent. Let's listen to Mariana's story.
I have lived all my life in Odessa. I have 4 children, 2 adopted and 2 I gave birth to. I have 8 grandchildren and am waiting for the 9th, and there is 1 great-grandson. My family has come through a lot. Altogether, my mother had 7 children in her family. Every one of them was touched by the war. The men went off to the front, and the women were almost all forced into a concentration camp together with the children. And it was there that the most awful and most terrible time began. My grandmother was shot on her way to the concentration camp. My mother, along with 2 of her children, ended up in the concentration camp. People died in front of my mother's eyes. Her hands and her feet were frozen. They were beaten by rods on their heads and tied up by their hair. It was just terrible. And when there was absolutely no strength and she could no longer stand, she began to pray that God would take her children quickly so that they wouldn't be tormented. My little brother froze to death in the snow, and my little sister, who is a little older than him, didn't live long. But when her little girl had no more strength to walk, she went blind. In front of my mother's eyes, her little girl's hands and legs froze, and this is how her child died. My mother lost her mind due to her grief. She managed to crawl away. She had to crawl because she couldn't walk due to her frostbitten feet. And she crawled away from hunger, from unhappiness. She ended up near some huts where she was picked up by some villagers, Ukrainians. They helped her a lot, and they hid her. On my father's side, my grandmother and grandfather also suffered a lot of violence. Romanian fascists sent them to clear the fields of mines in the Odessa region. A mine simply blew them up. They drove all the people in a heap without any remorse. Jews, Russians, Ukrainians, all the fellow villagers were driven to clear the fields. This barbarism is a mockery. When in 1943 the Germans were already driven out, my mother didn't even know her own name. She didn't remember anything as she'd lost her memory due to madness. Her children had been killed. She had been beaten. She had suffered from all kinds of grief, and her mother had been shot in front of her eyes. People, ordinary Ukrainian people, saved her. They called her Anyuskaya, goddess. My mother helped people and went from hut to hut. She whitewashed walls, she dug gardens, and the villagers loved her very much. When the war ended, my father returned from the front, and not finding his family, went by foot throughout the Odessa region to the places where the Jews had been driven. My father hoped that he would find her. He walked, stopping in villages where he would do some kind of work when he could. He went further and asked people about her. And finally he found her. But she did not recognize him or remember him. So he stayed on to work. He worked as a commandant and, as a demobilized soldier, was taken on to work. And my father won my mother's love all over again. He brought her back to life. He fell in love with her again. He brought back her memory. After the war in 1946, 2 more children were born, twins, little Sveta and little Kostya. But sadly, they only lived 4 to 5 days and died because they were very weak and my mother was very weak. But the strength of will and the strength of the souls of these people, their love which kept them, gave them the opportunity to have 2 more children. In 1948, my brother, Ilyushenka, was born, and then I was born in 1952. My parents had the opportunity to raise us and give us strength, health, intelligence, education, and love that they carried between them for almost 50 years of their lives. After 48 years of married life, 2 years before their golden wedding anniversary, my mother left this life, and my father couldn't live without her. 2 years later, he had a heart attack and went to be with her. Now I raise my children, grandchildren, and great-grandson in peace, love, and harmony. We have a very friendly family. We hope that the nightmare will not be repeated for our children and grandchildren. I have lived in Odessa all my life. Odessa was the most peaceful and peace-loving city. It was always a joyful, interesting, and welcoming place full of smiles. What is happening now? The world has turned upside down. It is painful to see young, beautiful, smart people walk with torches and hold fascist rallies. It's painful to see when you come to the cemetery, gravestones turned over and destroyed. Just destroyed, complete vandalism. It's very difficult to see this. I just want peace. I don't want war. People need to remember that we shouldn't ever fight, that we should live peacefully and love one another. And you shouldn't heat up wars on the basis of nationalism. I think this is impossible. All people are equal and should love each other.
Ezra International has reached out in love to assist Mariana with her immigration papers, and will also help her with the final steps toward her goal of making Aliyah, immigrating to Israel. If you would like to help Mariana and other Jewish families move home to Israel, send your gift to Ezra International.
You know, Mariana made it home. Thank God, and thanks to our partners, our donors. Ezra International was able to help Mariana escape these anti-Semitic surroundings. But you know there are thousands upon thousands of Jewish people still remaining in countries where the same type of hatred, the same type of anti-Semitic behavior and sentiment exist. In fact, the very week that I'm filming this episode, I heard from in the news that the Muslim immigrant who killed a Jewish teacher in France was released. He was released without charge based on the fact they said he was high on marijuana and did not know what he was doing. And France goes on. The only people that rose up and protested this were the Jewish population. I read one article about 20,000 people showed up, but they were primarily Jews. And so they feel that they're alone in France once again. And it was reminiscent of something that I'm aware of from history. You may be aware of also. A little over 100 years ago, there was a case in France called the Dreyfus Affair. Alfred Dreyfus was a Jewish officer in the French army, and he was accused wrongly of treason. And what it did was it revealed this anti-Semitic sentiment in France then, and a journalist named Theodore Herzl, happened to show up to cover this case. And if you know your history, you know Theodore Herzl is considered the father of modern political Zionism. He realized from seeing what happened to Captain Dreyfus that Jewish people were not safe among the Gentile world, that they needed a homeland of their own. And that's what set him off on that quest. And you know he was very influential in the formation of the state of Israel. Even though he died 50 years prior to the actual formation of the state of Israel, he was very influential in people considering Eretz Israel, then known as Palestine, the region of Palestine, as the homeland for the Jewish people. And that also reminds me of a story I want to share with you about a friend of mine. His name is Danny, and he lives in Israel today. But when he was a teenager, his father came to him while they were living in Romania and said, "We're moving to Israel." Well, Danny wasn't happy about that. The only thing he knew was his home in Romania, his school, his friends. But the family moved, and he said, as he grew up as a teenager in Israel, he got to the age where he had to go in the IDF, as all young men and women do, the Israeli Defense Force. He was in basic training, and they were doing a standard march that takes place in basic training in the Jordan Valley that goes from Gilgal to Jericho. Remember, when Joshua came into the land, that was the march he took from Gilgal to Jericho to take the city of Jericho. It was on this march that Danny said all of a sudden hit him. He realized that his past, his present, and his future all came together. And he realized why he was in the land of Israel. And he realized that he was a part of something so much greater than what he had realized previous. And that, all of this came together for a reason. And now Danny is a staunch Zionist. He loves Israel. He loves defending and talking about his land and his people. And so it's through this type of the unbroken chain of history that I spoke to you in the first segment. The unbroken chain of history. God set it up to where this people and this nation would be the vehicle to bring about world redemption. Now, Danny and others have come to that realization. They're living in Israel, and it is their homeland that God promised to them 4,000 years ago. And so with that, I'm going to break again for this commercial, and we'll be right back.
From Siberia to the Amazon, from Budapest to Buenos Aires, Jewish families hear the call to return to their biblical homeland, Israel. Their prophets foretold long ago that the return to Israel in our time would be a miracle. And it is. The prophets also foretold another calling for our time, to the Gentiles. And it is a call that Ezra International responds to each and every day. And you too can answer that call. You can bring Jewish people back to Israel from the four corners of the earth by praying, by learning about Aliyah, and by giving of your finances to help those in need. Join us at EzraInternational.org today as we answer the call together.
Answering the call together. Thank you for all those of you who have already answered that call. And I trust that there'll be more of you who have heard these words, seen these videos, and respond accordingly. You know, the words of Isaiah that I will leave you with today from Isaiah 35, verse 1, talks about another miracle. The wilderness and the wasteland shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as a rose. Do you know, we see this happening before our eyes. If you've been to Israel, you know that these words are coming true. And it highlights something that I think is important. The idea of partnering with God. If you could partner with God, would you? Well, that's exactly what the Jewish people who are living in Israel are doing today. They know of these prophecies. They know what God promised them, but they're actually working the land. They're doing the practical things, and it's where the mundane meets the miraculous. It's where their efforts are part of partnering with God to do the work in the land to fulfill these promises and to watch these miracles come to pass. And you too have an opportunity to do that by partnering with Ezra International and giving toward the Aliyah. You are helping fulfill the promise of God to bring his people home. You know, he could have done it like that. It just transported every Jewish person back to the land of Israel. But he decided he would rather partner with his children, his adopted children, those grafted in ones like you and I, to help bring back the Jewish people back to the land of Israel. And so you have that opportunity today. You can go to EzraInternational.org and check us out. And you can find ways to partnering with us through prayer, through small group study, and definitely by donating. We're not shy about that because we are very good stewards of the funds that you send to us, and we help Jewish people get home so that they can have restored hope. We get them out of the land where they're suffering from poverty and anti-Semitism, and get them back into the land of Israel where they have restored hope. So God bless you. Thank you for all that you're doing, and we'll see you soon. Shalom.